In the coming month, April 2025, the temperature in world affairs will get red hot. Expect action, expect chaos, expect fire. Neptune, the planet of collective ideals and cultural trends, will be taking its first steps into fiery Aries, while Mars, the planet of action and conflict, will be moving faster and faster after its recent retrograde. It's spent the last few weeks in the homely, domestic sign of Cancer, and we've seen a lot of difficult emotions released by people who feel like their home or homeland is somehow under attack. In the middle of April, we'll see a full moon that's going to trigger the war planet Mars, as well as Chiron, the asteroid representing the wounded healer archetype. We'll see events around this time that make us feel like the world is falling further out of balance. Expect a trigger event of some kind. This moon could bring up wounds in the psyche of the United States that have to do with conflict, violence, or the more troubling parts of US history. But be not afraid. This fiery transformation is what's needed to burn away the old to make way for the new. So welcome to another forecast episode from World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and let's get into this. Last month, I said I thought it would all kick off in March, and I don't think I was wrong. There's a real sense that the old rules don't apply any longer and that the world order is changing dramatically in front of our eyes. President Trump has been trying to push forward a deal with Russia over peace in Ukraine, which has essentially been opposed by most European leaders who clearly don't think enough Ukrainians have been sent to the meat grinder yet. Trump has also emphasized that Europe needs to take responsibility for its own security, and in response, the EU committed to a massive rearmament program. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen unveiled the Rearm Europe plan, proposing to mobilize 800 billion euros to enhance the EU's defense capabilities. All of this was signaled by the solar eclipse in Aries at the end of March. And last month, I said that that eclipse would have big implications for Germany, because similar eclipses in the same Saros series have done in the past. And that's exactly what we saw. Germany is rearming big time. But there were two eclipses in March, and the first was a lunar eclipse in the sign of Virgo on March the 14th, which heavily activated Saturn in Pisces. The Piscean ideal is one of universal flow. Saturn in Pisces is about establishing limits and boundaries in the oceanic realm, in things like trade and migration, which have become red-hot topics since Saturn entered Pisces in March of 2023. Enter the Trump tariffs, which came into force last month. These included 25% tariffs on all imports from Canada and Mexico, 10% on Chinese imports, and 25% on all steel and aluminium imports. Virgo is about technicalities and trade. Pisces is flow, and this Saturnian eclipse delivered new rules that limit trade flows. What we're watching is more evidence of the transition from the age of Earth to the age of air in action. Information flow is up, trade in goods is down. I also mentioned the possibility of labor strikes accompanying that eclipse. There were nationwide airport strikes in Germany, mass transit strikes in California, and general strikes in Morocco, among other places. And interestingly, the head of the United Auto Workers Union in the United States, an organization that I thought would come up at this eclipse, was in the news as he, surprisingly to some, came out in support of the Trump tariffs. We're now halfway to 2030, a year targeted by the World Economic Forum and the UN for the manifestation of their global agendas. Astrologically, this is reflected by the ongoing square between Jupiter and Saturn, marking a key moment in their 20-year cycle, which began in December 2020. In that year, Klaus Schwab, friend of the show, announced the Great Reset. I think this Jupiter-Saturn cycle is going to be about the attempts of these international institutions to institute some kind of global technological and technocratic control system, as I've said many times before. I also think the ongoing conjunction of Saturn and Neptune this year and next is speaking to this theme too. Neptune has to do with collectivism and universalism, while Saturn speaks to structures and crystallization. This conjunction will likely signify the establishment of collectivist systems with universalist ambitions. Lo and behold, in March, European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde said that the ECB was targeting October 2025 for the launch of its central bank digital currency, the digital euro. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction will be just 3 degrees from exactitude at that time. CBDCs would be a key component of any totalitarian digital control system. Control money, control the people. Just ask the Canadian truckers. That said, things aren't going so well for the globalizers. In late February, the European Central Bank's Target 2 payment system experienced an outage that lasted about 10 hours, leading critics to question why the ECB should be trusted to manage a digital currency if it can't even keep its current payment systems online. So as powerful as these people and these institutions may seem sometimes, the forces of darkness don't get to have everything their own way. I've increasingly come to see that the imposition of these systems is actually a mark of desperation. Plutocrats and bureaucrats realize that we're entering more enlightened times, as astrology and many spiritual traditions tell us, but they desperately want to retain control. It's not going to work, but it seems they're going to try. And there's something going on that I think is worth warning about. At the time I'm filming this, Neptune still hasn't entered Aries, but I think we're already feeling this transit strongly. I've talked a lot about this before and how it seems to signify the wave of populism and nationalism that's been building for several years now. But something I want to raise here is the idea of mass formation psychosis, a concept formulated by Belgian psychologist Matthias Desmet to explain how a sense of isolation and loneliness and lack of meaning in life can lead people to embrace illusory narratives supplied to them by power structures, which then make them feel like life is meaningful again. We've seen this over and over again in recent years in all sorts of spheres, as people have readily embraced bizarre narratives supplied to them by civil society, media, and governments without any sense of nuance or discernment. And if there's any planet we can associate with mass formation psychosis, it's Neptune. With Neptune in Pisces, we saw one of these emerge around the pandemic, in which people who were scared and alone really lost their minds and consented to things they would never agree to otherwise. With Neptune in Aries, the great risk we face is the emergence of mass formation psychoses around war. The powers that be are going to do everything they can to encourage new such mass formations, because that's what they do. Whether that's war in Europe or war in Iran or anywhere else, I can't help but worry that, quote unquote, they want more wars and want us supporting them. We'll be told that if we don't support them, we're evil people. We've already seen this with Ukraine. And again, I think that was Neptune in Aries coming into effect before its time had actually come. My advice is don't get sucked in and channel that Aries spirit in other ways by being brave and fiercely independent. Don't consent to their wars. If the Kali Yuga is indeed over, then it's time to flip the script. It's time to tell them that their old routines don't work anymore. 1,000 years ago, the great mathematician and astrologer Al-Biruni wrote in his Elements of the Art of Astrology that the sign of Pisces was associated with the Sea of Yemen. And it still is. Since Saturn entered Pisces in March 2023, we've seen the Houthis of Yemen take action in support of Gaza by disrupting shipping through the Red Sea. In March 2025, we had a stellium of planets in Pisces, and once again, Yemen was in the news after the US launched attacks on Houthi positions. Trump has been threatening war against Iran, which has long been an objective of Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu. With Uranus's geodetic position very close to Tehran right now, I'm worried about the potential for this to happen. Again, as I said, beware of mass formation psychoses around war, whoever's war that happens to be. It's almost certainly not ours. But I want to end this roundup on a high note. On March the 15th, a team of academics published an incredible press release on research they've conducted on the Khafre Pyramid, the second largest on the Giza Plateau. They've used radar data to scan the pyramid and what lies beneath it. And what they found is nothing short of incredible. They found 8 cylindrical structures surrounded by spiral pathways descending to a depth of 648 meters, where they merge into 2 large cubic structures. The entire structure extends 2 kilometers beneath the surface. If this is true, and it seems that it is, then it absolutely blows away the mainstream archaeological narrative about who built the pyramids and why. It vindicates Graham Hancock's work and potentially opens the door wide open to the idea of advanced ancient civilizations and even to cyclical history. What do you think of that, Flint Dibble? On March the 15th, when this research was released, we find a stellium of planets in mystical Pisces, with the Sun, signifier of the divine light of consciousness, conjunct Saturn, signifier of ancient things. Goodbye, Kali Yuga. And now, let's get into the astrology of April. If you're enjoying this video or just generally want to support my channel, then I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like by clicking down there, and do also subscribe to make sure that you don't miss future episodes. Thanks. On April the 7th, Mercury will station direct in the sign of Pisces, marking the end of the latest 3-week Mercury retrograde period. And a few days after that, on April the 13th, Venus will station direct too, so all the planets will be in direct motion from then until May the 4th, when Pluto will station retrograde. When planets are moving forward through the zodiac, we tend to see more action in the world, and so the pace of events is just going to keep rising from here on out, especially given that Mars, the planet of action itself, is picking up speed with every week that goes by. Now, the first half of April is going to be characterized by a big grouping of planets in Pisces, with Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and the North Node all in that sign and pretty close to each other for several days. This is a complex brew, with Mercury and Venus stationing direct. At a personal level, there may be a sense of issues around communication, trade, and relationships finally getting cleared up and moving forward around this time. And I think it could be a creatively potent period. Venus is the exaltation ruler of Pisces, and so she's very powerful here, and ultimately she's calling the shots in this configuration. Mercury and Venus together marry technical skill with artistry, while Saturn's presence adds gravitas or structure or melancholy to the mix. There are 1,000 ways this could play out in your life, but what we can be sure of is that Piscean themes are going to be activated here. These include spirituality, intoxication, flow, artistry, and so forth. The area of life signified by your Pisces whole sign house will see some action around this time, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in international relations around the time Venus stations direct. Venus retrogrades tend to speak to trouble in diplomacy, among other things, and this Venus retrograde saw what may well go down as the greatest diplomatic fallout of all time. I'm referring, of course, to President Trump and J.D. Vance's dressing down delivered to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House. Whatever you think of the players involved, it was extraordinary to see a scene like that play out in front of the cameras and the gaze of the entire planet. This was Venus retrograding in the fiery, warlike sign of Aries, ruled by a fallen, emotional Mars in Cancer, and it was surely one for the astrology textbooks. In the March forecast on this channel, I pointed out that the last time Venus retrograded in this part of the zodiac, 8 years ago in 2017, US-EU relations took a dive as the EU almost banned visa-free travel for Americans. I said I thought that this boded ill for transatlantic relations in March. Well, we saw a huge wedge opening up between the EU and the US over the Ukraine war. Donald Trump's US is seeking to try to end the war and do a deal with Russia, and the EU is mostly opposing these efforts and continuing its fervent support for Ukraine. The US and the EU haven't looked further apart in a long time. I also said I thought we might see the UK and the EU get closer again in this period. During the last Venus retrograde in Pisces in 2017, the UK triggered Article 50 to leave the EU. Venus retrogrades can often rekindle old relationships, and in March we saw the UK draw much closer to Europe once again. Just look at this headline: the Ukraine crisis has accelerated a reset of UK-EU relations. But will it last? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this was possibly a Venus retrograde thing, and it won't. Now, the same day that Venus stations direct, we see a full moon in one of Venus's signs, Libra. On April the 13th, we'll see a full moon at 23 degrees of Libra. This is a moment of culmination or revelation, or a turning point of some kind that will evoke the Aries-Libra polarity. Fiery, Mars-ruled Aries has to do with the authentic expression and experience of the self. Libra is the sign of balance and harmony, of finding one's place in community, in society. We can boil Aries-Libra down to the theme of the self versus society. But there's a lot more going on with this full moon, and it isn't going to be the easiest of lunations. Firstly, it's in a fairly close square with Mars in Cancer, which is now picking up speed. We'll talk more about Mars in Cancer later in this video, but for now, suffice to say that it's an emotional and easily triggered Mars operating in the moon sign of Cancer, which has to do with protected, bounded spaces of identity, like the home or the homeland. The Sun in this lunation chart is also closely conjunct Chiron, the asteroid named for the centaur of Greek myth. Chiron signifies areas of wounding, as well as the gifts that wounds provide us with, and which we can use to help others. We all carry psychic wounds with us through our lives, and one area of life where this has happened is indicated by the Chiron placement of your natal chart. In world astrology, I've noticed that Chiron can be quite malefic. It can signify literal woundings, among other things. We can also use astrologer Dietrich Pessin's lunar gestation cycle to figure out what this lunation might be speaking to. I explained how to use this technique in the members-only bonus section of the March forecast episode. Essentially, this technique reveals that lunations actually form families that are separated in time by 9 months, the period of human gestation. And so this full moon is connected to a first quarter moon that took place in Libra 9 months earlier in mid-July, and the eclipse that took place 9 months before that at 21 degrees of Libra on October the 15th of 2023. And so events that took place close to that date were the seeds for events that will come around the time of this coming full moon. I also have astrological reason to think that the period around the time of this full moon could be dangerous for the health and safety of US President Donald Trump. In the bonus section of this video, available for members of World Astrology Report, I explain what they are. If you want to access that version of this video, just sign up as a member of World Astrology Report at worldastrologyreport.com. You'll also get access to all my extended members-only videos and long-form live streams. And you'll be able to join my next live stream, which is taking place on March the 29th at 9 AM Eastern Time. We're going to be digging into what the Saturn-Neptune conjunction of this year and 2026 will be all about, using a powerful technique that allows us to predict the events signified by conjunctions in advance with amazing accuracy. But back to the video. Soon after the full moon, Mars will move into Leo, and we will finally, after many months, say goodbye to Mars in Cancer. On April the 18th, Mars will move into Leo for the second time this cycle. And so it's a good time to review Mars's recent retrograde period. Mars stationed retrograde at 6 Leo on December the 6th, then retrograded from Leo into Cancer on January the 6th, then stationed direct at 17 Cancer on February the 24th. So it spent a long time in Cancer, the sign of the moon. Both Leo and Cancer, which are the signs ruled by the luminaries, the sun and moon, have to do with the theme of identity. Whereas Leo is about the unique and authentic spirit of the individual, Cancer has to do with identity within bounded spaces of protection, such as the body, the home, the nation, and so forth. Mars is traditionally said to be unhappy in Cancer. It's said to be in the state of debilitation we call fall. Outgoing, swashbuckling Mars is not particularly happy in bounded spaces, and the whole idea of these Cancerian spaces is that they're places where emotions can flow freely. And being in touch with your emotions isn't really Mars's kind of thing. So Mars in Cancer can signify unskillful action driven by emotion, irritation, frustration, or violence in the home or other bounded spaces. And I think this Mars in Cancer period has left a lot of people feeling angry or upset or frustrated around themes of identity and the home or homeland. Across the political spectrum, people seem to feel like their home is under attack. On the right, people feel that unchecked immigration is destroying the fabric of their societies. On the left, people are fretting that the right is causing division and hatred within societal families. And in the US in particular, there's a sense that the Trump administration, together with Elon Musk, is tearing down the institutions of the American homeland. And of course, the right thinks that the homeland will do just fine without all that bureaucracy. The different social networks on which people get their news these days really seem to be doing their damnedest to stoke these kinds of feeling on all sides. We're being manipulated into strong feelings by algorithms based on what we identify with. Step back, recognize that, and don't let them do it to you. Terrible things can come from over-identification. For example, there's been some horrific sectarian violence in certain parts of the world recently. One of them is Syria, where the new Al-Qaeda-linked government, now the good guys apparently, has been murdering Alawite minority Christians in huge numbers. That government took over Syria almost exactly at Mars's retrograde station, and we're seeing the consequences of that now that Mars is moving forward. Another story that's played out in line with this Mars cycle is ongoing in Romania. On December the 6th of last year, the very day that Mars stationed retrograde, the Romanian Constitutional Court annulled a presidential election that was won by a populist candidate, Călin Georgescu. And again, with Mars now moving direct again, this story has come back because on March the 11th, the Constitutional Court barred Georgescu from running again in reruns of the election. We're really seeing here the Aries-Libra dynamic, which is going to be a feature of the next 13 years or so of history. The authorities in Romania and Europe more generally are trying to use the courts, Libra, to prevent nationalist populist candidates, Aries, from taking power. But given that Neptune is going to be in Aries until 2038, they're most likely swimming against the tide, pun intended. When Mars comes back into Leo on April the 18th, its focus will move back to the Leonine themes of visibility, royalty, and centrality. The LA fires began with Mars right at the boundary between Cancer and Leo. Those fires saw thousands of homes, Cancer, go up in smoke, many of them belonging to famous celebrities and some of the most affluent neighbors in the US, Leo. I suspect we're going to see more fires with Mars back in Leo. And Mars is picking up speed right now, with last month's eclipse in Aries and Neptune's move into that sign. I just have the feeling that we're still due some kind of triggering, violent event that will really set the more dramatic events of this year in motion. And not to get conspiratorial on you, but right now, globalism, if you want to call it that, has a big problem. The West is disunited, populism and nationalism are growing, and the WEF agenda to turn the whole world into one big happy, corporatist, technocratic, transhumanist family is stalling. But there's nothing like a carefully curated event to get everyone on side. One that makes all right-thinking folk agree that something must be done. Of course, suspiciously convenient events that give governments complete license to do all the evil stuff they really want to do but can't get away with normally only happen in the minds of crazy conspiracy theorists. Let's change tack a bit with something a little easier to digest. Pun intended? It's Taurus season. On April the 19th, the Sun will move into the tropical zodiac sign of the Bull, and Taurus season begins. Taurus is a feminine, fixed Earth sign ruled by the planet Venus, with the Moon as its exaltation ruler. The zodiac is like a story told in 12 parts. In the first sign of the zodiac, Aries, we head out into the world and conquer a little territory to call our own. When we reach Taurus, our swords are beaten into plowshares. We plow, sow our crops, and then harvest the bounty of the land. We rest and make merry and enjoy what we've harvested. And so Taurus is really about enjoying the material bounty of the manifest world. But with the strong influence of the Moon on Taurus, rhythm is also important to this sign. Its ideal formulation is one of a regular, steady rhythm between work, rest, and play, like the farming calendar. People with strong Taurus placements tend to be adept at extracting material benefits from the world. They work as hard as they need to get the things they want to enjoy life. When the Sun is in Taurus, in the Northern Hemisphere, we're in the middle of the spring season, and nature is really showing its glory. At this time of year, light is steadily growing every day. The days are growing longer, and the nights are shortening. There's a sense of letting the good times roll, and that's what Taurus is all about. If you want to understand this sign, think of Venus and the Moon, the element of Earth and its fixed quality. The Venusian aspect of Taurus shouldn't be missed. Taurus appreciates beauty, harmony, pleasure, and the arts as much as anyone. Something I've noticed about Taurus is that for them, the shaping of a life is itself a kind of art. One highly Taurian figure, perhaps surprisingly, is Iggy Pop, who has his Sun and Moon in Taurus. Taurus isn't as conservative as you might think. Speaking of the city of Miami, he once said, "Miami is nothing like me, and that's why I need to be here. It's the opposite. I'm practical, where this place is moody. I'm stolid in my interior, where this place has a certain flair. And I'm materialistic in a sense that this place is fundamentally spiritual." And so the solar light of consciousness is about to shine through the Taurian lens, signifying the perfect time of year to think about the shape of your life here on Earth and to consider how you can shape it into something a little more beautiful. And now for something completely different. On April the 29th, we'll see an opposition between Mars and Pluto, marking the third and final such opposition during this 2-year Mars-Pluto cycle. Mars is the planet of action, assertiveness, and conflict. Pluto is the dark lord of the underworld, and the combination of these two planets can be violent and destructive. It can be a volcanic combination, signifying the violent eruption of energy that's been pent up beneath the surface. Pluto is equivalent to the Greek god of the underworld, Hades, who was said to possess a magical artifact, the Cap of Invisibility, also known as the Helm of Darkness. This item was said to allow Pluto to become invisible and to vanquish his enemies in battle. And so Pluto can signify hidden or invisible things, and Mars-Pluto can signify covert operations and secretive actions. And at the major aspects of this Mars-Pluto cycle, we've seen the theme of nuclear saber rattling between Russia and the United States coming up repeatedly. Going back to the conjunction of these planets, on February the 14th of 2024, the US accused the Russians of planning to put nuclear weapons in space. At the first waxing square of the planets, the Russians sent a fleet to Cuba, evoking memories of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And soon after the first of the 3 oppositions between Mars and Pluto, the Russians used a new hypersonic missile called the Oreshnik on the city of Dnipro in Ukraine. This was a not-so-subtle threat against the US and the West in general, because this weapon could be fitted with nuclear warheads. At the Mars-Pluto opposition at the end of April, unfortunately we're likely to see violence in the news, and I would not be at all surprised to see this theme of nuclear threats between Russia and the US coming up again in some way, even though they seem to be besties now. The same day as this Mars-Pluto opposition perfects, we'll see a new moon in Taurus. A new moon in Taurus will signify a new beginning and seed moment of some kind in the Taurus whole sign house of your natal chart. This is a part of your life ruled by Venus, one in which that Taurian striving for material gain and harmonious rhythm holds sway. But like the full moon earlier in April, this new moon is bringing Mars, the war planet, into the picture. Actually, if we look at the chart for the moon, we can see that it's squaring the Mars-Pluto opposition. So there's a sense that whatever is born around this time will be accompanied by tension and the volcanic release of energy. Using the geodetic map, there are 2 parts of the world highlighted by a new moon in Taurus. One of them is this part of the world, which includes Russia and Ukraine, the Middle East, and a large portion of Eastern Africa. There are wars underway in all these places, and I personally think we can put this down, at least in part, to Uranus's presence in Taurus since 2018. We can expect these parts of the world to be in the news as these volcanic energies are released. The country of Ireland is also traditionally associated with Taurus, and right now it's something of a tinderbox. Something to bear in mind is that Uranus will be conjunct the highly malefic and violent fixed star Algol for pretty much all of April. Uranus-Algol conjunctions in the past have seen great violence in the world. The first conjunction came in mid-July, when Uranus was right at the midheaven of the chart of Donald Trump. In the members-only extended version of this video, available at worldastrologyreport.com, we look at some astrological factors that suggest there could be reason for concern about the health of the president this month. Thanks, and see you next time.